Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to give you my review of the Sony ZV-E10 Mark II vlogging-based camera, which is why I'm out right now in the woods doing things a little bit differently to open up this particular video. Now, the ZV-E10 Mark II is the second generation of Sony's vlogging-specific camera, but one that is based around an interchangeable lens mount. And so in this case, it allows you to choose the lens that you're going to use as opposed to having a fixed lens, be it a prime or a zoom lens. Now, there is an available kit lens that I'm using at the moment, and that is the second generation of their 16 to 50 millimeter power zoom lens. And so with that is the ability to control power zoom right from within the camera. Now, the ZV-E10 has some significant upgrades to it, and that includes the sensor from the A6700, which gives you a higher resolution at 26 megapixels. It also has improved autofocus system that is largely inherited from the A6700 as well. It's got an upgraded battery and a variety of other features that we'll detail as a part of today's review. Does that sound interesting? Well, if so, stay tuned, and we're going to dive into all of the details right after a word from our sponsor.
Today's episode is brought to you by Fantom Wallet, the minimalist modern wallet that is now even better with the new Fantom X that is crafted from aluminum right here in Canada. It is 22% smaller and 35% lighter, while still making it easy to access your cards and money when you need them, thanks to their unique fanning mechanism. You could even customize your wallet due to its modular design, with accessories like a money clip, cash holder, ID display, and even Chipolo and AirTag tracking integration. Visit store.fantomwallet.com to check out their unique sizes, styles, and finishes that span from aluminum to wood to carbon fiber, and use code DUSTIN15 for 15% off when you're ready to check out.
So the ZV-E10 Mark II has grown a little bit, and that is for a very specific reason. The camera is now 114.8 millimeters wide, 67.5 millimeters tall, and 54.2 millimeters deep. That's 4.5 inches by 2.7 inches by 2.1 inches. That means we've gained 3 millimeters in height. We have gained 5.5 millimeters in depth. And you can see from these comparison angles that there's a definite difference in the overall depth of the camera in particular. That's where you see it. But the reason for that is to accommodate, it's a very positive change because it's to accommodate the much larger MPFZ-100 battery that is found in most of Sony's better cameras. And so that takes us up to 2,280 mAh compared, which more than doubles the battery capacity. I think the other is 1,060. And so we have got a definite improvement there. So what that means is that the SEPA rating on this camera goes from 440 shots on the original ZV-E10 to 610 shots here on the Mark II version. Probably even more importantly, however, the 4K video recording time goes from 80 minutes up to 130 minutes here. And for a vlogging specific camera, it's much more disruptive, in my opinion, to have a battery die in the middle of a video capture than what it is in the midst of shooting stills. It's always disruptive, but much more so then, where it might throw off your edit and your rhythm. You know, you might miss a shot that you're not going to get back. And so getting that extra 50 minutes of recording time obviously is pretty huge, particularly if the point of this obviously is to travel light. So if you're wanting to go out with maybe just the camera with the battery in it for the day, not carrying any additional accessories, you're much more likely to be able to do that successfully here due to that larger battery. And kind of a secondary benefit is that the grip here is actually much, much better. There's enough depth there. Obviously, the camera's still not tall enough that for a hand my size, I still have to put my pinky and park it underneath there. But my other fingers are actually fairly comfortable, and the grip itself feels quite comfortable. So I consider that all to be a positive change. And yes, the weight is up, I believe, about 30 grams. Now with the battery and memory card included, we're right under 300 grams in terms of overall weight. But again, I think it's all a positive change to get you that extra battery capacity. A little bit of extra room on that grip also allows for a slight recalibration of the controls. The control layout here is largely similar. You can see in these shots that if we look at the back, it looks pretty much the same. From the side angles, even from the front, most things look the same other than the difference in depth. But at the top view here, we see that the on-off switch, rather than just being kind of on an island in the center of the camera on the top plate, is now moved up to where it can be operated one-handed. Now, I do find, just because of muscle memory, that because a lot of Sony cameras, I can turn it on and off right there. I tend to activate the power zoom instead, but there is a secondary lever there that allows you to switch between on and off. And again, being able to do that one-handed, I think, is very useful. It cleans up the control scheme overall. The other difference here, which I think is again a positive one, is that we have an actual switch to go between stills, video, and then S and Q, which is slow and quick setups here, rather than a button that causes you to have to interact with the LCD screen to accomplish that. The direct switch, I think, is just, it's direct, and so it allows you just very quickly and visually switch to the mode that you want. So overall, I would consider that to be a very positive. Now, this camera is unique compared to most Sony cameras in that you do have the power zoom controls that are actually integrated right there onto the front of the grip. Now, if you've got an actual power zoom equipped lens like the kit lens here, it means that you can, right from there, you can zoom smoothly in and out, which is obviously a very welcome thing, be able to do that. But I was curious and discovered that, yes, in fact, that if you are operating in video mode and you're shooting, for example, either digital zoom or even better, just the clear image zoom that Sony allows, using that extra bit of sensor that's not being used in 4K recording, it actually, you can control any lens in that zoom fashion, not just a power zoom type lens. And so here, for example, I'm shooting with just a prime lens, the Viltrox 56mm f1.7, and the ability to actually, zoom back and forth a bit is extremely useful, obviously, because you're doing that in a smoother fashion than if you were trying to control that from within the camera itself some way. Your other option is to do that from some kind of grip where it's using Bluetooth, and that's useful as well. But again, if you're going for self-contained, that makes it even more useful and more compact there. Now, the other, out on the top, outside of those things, we have the video record button, obviously important in a camera like this. And then we also have a C1/ background defocus button. Now, a couple of things about the background defocus button. The point of this is that for those that are, maybe less accustomed to manual control of their cameras, pushing that is going to cause the camera to open up the aperture on the lens that's attached to its largest maximum aperture. So it's going to defocus the background, but to the extent that the lens is capable of. Don't think that this is actually going to magically defocus backgrounds. It's not even using software to defocus the background. It is simply opening the lens up to the maximum possible aperture. Now, if you have one of Sony's lenses that has an aperture ring attached and you're actually in the manual aperture control, this button, just know that this button is not going to work because it's being overridden. Whatever signal it would send to the lens is being overwritten by the actual lens itself. And so you need to have that lens in the A or automatic mode for that button to work. And if you try to do it otherwise, this is the error message that you're going to get on screen. Because I'm very comfortable with direct control, obviously, I don't find that button particularly useful, but it's also the C1 button, which means that it can be customized to whatever function you deem to be more useful. So, that works for me. On the top, we also have this 3-capsule microphone that is unique to these ZV cameras. And it is, it's much more advanced than what your typical on-camera microphone is. There's 3 different microphones that are designed to pick up sound from different angles, kind of pointed at different angles. And so you can choose between an auto mode that tries to select the right mode. You can choose front, which, if you're doing vlogging, for example, like this is going to be the proper mode for that. Now, in this particular scene, I have set the microphone priority to capturing the front-based audio, so it's going to not be focusing on getting anything from the rear, since I want to record from the front in this vlogging situation. There's also a rear mode, so if you're standing behind the camera and you're wanting to get your voice and not what's going on in front, that's going to be the appropriate mode for that. Here's a look at the scene, but also the sound that comes when I set up the microphone to be directed towards the rear, hearing my voice. And then there's also an all directions mode, which just tries to pick up a 360-degree sound. I think it's a little bit less effective in my opinion, but here's a couple of different sequences where I test out the different modes out in the real world. Here's a look at the scene, but also the sound that comes when I set up the microphone to be directed towards the rear, hearing my voice. Now here's the same scene setup where if I am using the all directions microphone instead. Here's another vlogging type sequence because I know you all love the camera angle where you can see right up my nose. Now in this sequence, I have set the microphone audio to auto, and so it should hopefully intelligently detect what kind of audio that we're looking for in this particular situation and focus it towards the front where it can pick up the sound of my voice over any kind of environmental audio noise. Okay, here's the exact same sequence, except for this time I have set the microphone to all directions. Let's see if the audio sounds any different here. So one thing you can say is it obviously makes a real difference. This is more than just a gimmick. It definitely makes a difference. The other thing to further enhance audio capabilities is the fact that the hot shoe here is actually Sony's multi-interface shoe, which means that with the appropriate mics, you can put them into that hot shoe and you can actually record digital audio through those microphones. So again, further enhancing your capabilities. Now, I've noted that most of the control scheme here is similar, but there's another really significant and very important change here. Previously, the actual memory card slot was in the battery door on the bottom of the camera, which qualifies as my least favorite spot. Sony has moved that up to a side point here to where right in between the ports on the left side of the camera, there is now that single UHS 2 compatible SD card slot. So it meant a slight reorganization of the ports. The same stuff is here, USB-C, microphone input, headphone monitoring jack, and then a micro HDMI output. Those are all here and present, just slightly reorganized there on the side. The fully articulating 3-inch touchscreen has a very, very slight resolution bump. It is up from 920,000 dots to 1.036 million dots, and so just a little bit higher resolution. I find that Sony has gotten much better in its touchscreen capabilities, and now menu navigation, you have full menu navigation even by touch. So again, appreciated there. Now, this camera, by design, does not have a viewfinder. That may be fine if your priority is just pure video capture. I do find, because I still like to take photos, I'm a photographer first, that I really miss a viewfinder, particularly when I'm out in bright light conditions. It can be sometimes quite difficult to see a screen, and then if you're trying to track action and see the screen, it becomes more difficult altogether. And so I really do miss the viewfinder. That's just something you're going to have to deal with. It is part of the design. Now, the kit lens that you can choose to have the camera bundled with is an updated version of the previous generation lens. This also is a Mark II lens. So this is the Power Zoom 16 to 50 millimeter f3.5 to 5.6 OSS Mark II lens. So it is the same lens optically. And so it's not bad. It's kit lens-ish, and so it has strengths and weaknesses. But the main thing that's been upgraded here is that it does have better OSS, better stabilization, and it also has better autofocus to keep up with ever-evolving, faster capture rates. And so it's now, compatible up to 120 frames with, full autofocus during that whole time. So obviously some important improvements there. And frankly, I found that the lens works just fine. It's very small, very light. If you want to travel small and light, this is a great package for doing that. And the other main ingredient that it's bringing to the table that's lacking in the camera is that OSS. The camera does not have in-body image stabilization. And so that means that having a lens with stabilization, particularly for video capture, is going to be important. You do have the option of using a digital IS, image stabilization, for video capture, but it does come with a fairly significant 1.33 times crop factor. And so better to have stabilization through some other means most of the time, I would say. And so that's certainly worth it. And the truth of the matter is that while the lens retails individually for $300 in this kit, Sony sells it for just $100 in addition. I would say it's probably $100 well spent, even if you don't use it all that often. A small compact lens like this, particularly for video capture, I think is going to be probably useful at times, so probably worth doing it. Autofocus is another area of significant improvement here. We have gone from the older 425 phase detect points, over a contrast AF system, backing it up, that hybrid system that was seen originally, I believe, in the A6400. We have moved up to the more advanced autofocus system of the A6700. That's 759 phase detect points, along with more contrast AF behind it, making this a much improved autofocus system. Further improved improved by being backed up by the Bion ZXR processor that is going to help to move information down the pipeline for a variety of things much more quickly. Now, what we don't have relative to the A6700 is a dedicated AI processor. I've actually seen that reported a variety of ways, and so some sources saying that it has it, some saying it doesn't. But in my research from Sony themselves, I don't believe that it does have that. And I think that's pretty evident from the fact that while you do have, full-time IAF, it's limited to just 3 trackable subjects, human, animal, and bird, as opposed to the wider variety of subjects that are there when you have a dedicated AI engine that is working. What I did find, however, is that it could track action just fine, and I was able to get good shots with things on the move. I found very excellent autofocus accuracy throughout my review. I was able to hand this lens with a 85mm lens, which by the time you do the crop factor, you're getting up near 130 millimeters, so narrow depth of field. Put it in the hands of a stranger on a hike to take a picture of myself and our group, and throughout the series of shots, they were all perfectly focused. IAF is doing its job, and so that's important. I also found in a pretty complicated situation, I saw a snake in the undergrowth there, and so I wanted to take a picture. I shot at f1.4. I was able to get accurately focused results in that very difficult, a lot of extra things for autofocus to get stuck on. It nailed the eye where it needed to, and so I really appreciated that. Another interesting decision here is that Sony has moved away from having a hybrid of a mechanical and electronic shutter to a purely electronic shutter. Often what we see on higher end cameras, though there are a little bit more limitations imposed here. Now, I will say that since this is not a stacked sensor, it tells me that they are fairly confident that that processor is moving information quickly enough to reduce rolling shutter and things like that. So what we have here as a benefit is that you have an improved top shutter speed at 1/8,000th of a second rather than 1/4,000th of a second on the original ZV-E10. What is a downgrade, however, is that if you want to use a camera like this in the studio and you happen to want to do flash syncing, this is not your camera. With this purely electronic shutter and it not having kind of the robust reinforcement you'll see on the higher end cameras, what you end up with here is a flash sync speed of only 1/30th of a second, which is not useful at all. So not a strength for this camera. Certainly don't buy it for that. Now, relative to the original ZV-E10, we do have upgraded buffer depth here. Again, I think probably because of that processor being able to boot the information along more quickly. And so just know, however, if you want to get into fairly deep buffers, you need to choose the smaller formats. JPEGs, for example, you can shoot extra fine JPEGs. You can get 143, which is very useful. You bump that down just to the fine JPEG setting, you can get over 1,000. That's obviously incredibly useful. With uncompressed RAWs, you can get as many as 59. So that again is a significant improvement, and 59 is enough to be useful. Definitely very good for this level of camera. Now, for me, because you now have the option of shooting lossless compressed RAW, which is always my go-to format if it's available, and it is now here. It wasn't before, but it is now in the Mark II version. But if you're shooting lossless compressed RAWs, and then you top that up by shooting JPEGs, and I needed to shoot JPEGs too, because unfortunately, at the moment, I can't even process those RAW images. ACR or Lightroom won't open them yet, and so there's certain things I can't do yet until I have a chance to evaluate those in the future. So I needed JPEGs, so I had something to actually show for my work right now. So shooting that combination drops that buffer depth down to just 17 frames. Well, you can shoot at 11 frames per second burst, which means that that buffer fills really quick when you're shooting like that. So I was shooting this sequence of shots of a friend on a rope swing, and obviously I did not have enough frames to get him all the way through the drop down to the splash. And so anyway, I do miss that for that regard. But again, it's hard to argue against what we get here because it not only is improved over the previous generation, but it is better than a lot of cameras at this particular level of price and or competition. The video side of things has seen also huge upgrades here. The original ZV-E10, it's kind of interesting for a a vlogging focused camera, which is the way that Sony markets this camera. It really didn't have all that impressive of video specs. It was limited to just 8-bit video capture internally. It could only shoot up to 4K 30, even that with some crop factor. In this case, we have moved up to 10-bit video capture, so higher end footage. You can shoot 4K 30 with full sensor readout, no crop factor at all, and you can shoot as high as 4K 60 with just a very mild 1.1 times crop. What we do have, rather than pixel binning, we have down sampling here, so we have full sensor readout and the footage looks great. Up to 120 frames per second in full HD if you want to do some slow-mo, serious slow-mo type work. A cool feature for those that, aren't accustomed to diving into the menus and selecting the option is the fact that in video mode, there's a button right on screen that allows you to choose something called Cine Vlog. And if you click that, it puts you right into S-Cinetone, giving you kind of a picture profile that looks very cinematic. It changes the crop to a 2.35 to 1 ratio with the black bars, so kind of a more of a true widescreen type look. Frame rate is automatically set at 24 frames per second. And as you can see here, it gives quite a cinematic look, just at a touch. So that is useful. If you're wanting to dive deeper into the bitrate options, you can get as high as 600 megabits per second, much higher threshold. So you can just get much more serious footage here. You also have the ability, obviously, to shoot S-Cinetone. You have the option of shooting S-Log3. You can get up to 14 stops of dynamic range for that log footage. So all of that is much more serious here. You have the ability to assign LUTs, even custom LUTs here. All of that is fantastic. I also found good video AF tracking, and so those improvements to the autofocus system also apply very importantly here to video. I found that in sequences when I was doing testing vlog that it did a perfect job of tracking my face and my eye through very mixed lighting as I was walking along under trees and just that dappled lighting up and down, up and down. It did a great job of not getting distracted. One other thing that's available here, again, might be useful for vloggers, is a product showcase mode. And when you engage that, it is going to prioritize focusing on anything that's placed towards the camera, kind of moved out towards the camera. In this case, I was showing off the kit lens there. And you can see that it does a good job of staying, instead of staying focused on me, of focusing on that product, and so that you can showcase that. And it gives that look that a lot of people like, that depth where there's something defocused beyond and you're able to really see that product kind of come out towards you. It also has now received Sony's focus breathing compensation. Well, that does come with a variable crop depending upon how much correction is needed for the lens, but that is another area where you're going to be able to get even better video footage in a variety of situations. So this is now a much more serious video camera here, and obviously that's very appropriate in a vlogging-oriented camera. Now, as mentioned previously, when it comes to the sensor performance, my grade is somewhat incomplete at this point. I have a pretty good idea, having reviewed many sensors from Sony in the past, of what I'm going to expect, but because I can only access JPEGs right now, I really can't do as deep a dive as what you might typically expect me to do. This is the upgraded APS-C format, 26 megapixels Exmor CMOS sensor that is currently in the FX30 video camera and then in the A6700 hybrid camera. This is an improved sensor by every metric. It's higher resolution, and if I look at, for example, photons to photos, and their look at comparing the original ZV-E10 compared to the A6700, that dynamic range in the sensor has increased by nearly a half stop, which is very significant at this point. It's near 11 stops in their test, and for a frame of reference, that is better than any of the other APS-C sensors that is in their catalog, and they have a lot of sensors there. It's top notch for APS-C performance, so that's very useful. It also has a slight improvement when it comes to the low light ISO performance. Again, impressive for increasing resolution and then also increasing the ISO performance. And again, it is very near the top of the class for that. Native ISO range now is from 100 to 32,000. It's expandable in either direction. I definitely don't recommend expanding over the top of that 32,000 into 52,800 or higher. Just not worth it. Don't go there. I find just in shooting JPEGs and not being able to have more finite control with raw images, I find that beyond ISO 12,800, there's just too much skin smoothing, or too much, I would just say smoothing in general, to JPEGs. And so I find that shots in color were fine up to 12,800, a little more blocky than what I would like, but not bad. But beyond that, like shooting at ISO 32,000, I could tolerate them in monochrome, like this shot of the guitar, but beyond that, I didn't love it. But outside of that, because I'm mostly evaluating JPEGs do look great. Good color, good detail, good skin tones, and I've shot in a variety of situations and been really pleased with the images that I've been able to bring home, despite not being able to shoot, or at least I can shoot the RAWs, I just can't process them in the way that I typically would. So my conclusion is this: there are a lot of really important key upgrades here that make the Sony ZV-E10 Mark II make much more sense as a vlogging or video camera than the first generation camera did. We've got much better battery life, much better video options, we've got a better sensor, we've got better autofocus, we've got a better processor. All of these things are very welcome. Now, all of that does come at a price. The MSRP for the Mark II has grown by $300 relative to the original ZV-E10. So obviously that moves it into a different class of camera in terms of the competition. At $1,000, which is where we're at this point, $998 US, that opens up a fair bit of other competitive options for you to choose from. Here's what I would say as a general observation to help you to make that decision if you are kind of looking and evaluating different camera systems and options. Sony cameras, in my experience, are rarely the least expensive camera option when you're looking at other brands. But the Sony ecosystem at this point has nearly endless lens choices, typically at much lower prices, mixed throughout that, available than what's available on other platforms. And that's particularly true of platforms like Canon, for example. And so what that means is that while the cameras tend to be a little bit more expensive, the whole ecosystem tends to be less expensive in the long run. Now, obviously, that only makes sense. That equation only makes sense if you plan to experiment with more than one or two lenses. For example, you think you might want to own multiple lenses. Well, if that's the case, then I think Sony makes a lot of sense because there are so many lens options and a lot of great compact lenses that are either full frame or APS-C that are available on E-mount that make this, basically gives you endless possibilities for what you can do with the camera. But again, that's only going to make sense if you plan to spend more money down the road and expand your lens collection. If you're planning on going with just a kit lens, or one or two lenses, then you might want to consider other brands and evaluate them head to head. But if you plan to go a little bit deeper, I think Sony is a fantastic platform to choose, and the ZV-E10 Mark II is a pretty impressive little camera. I miss the viewfinder. In certain situations, I'm going to miss the in-body image stabilization, but it does a lot of things really well in a very compact package. I'm Dustin Abbott, and if you want more information, you can check out my text review that's linked down below. There's also an image gallery that is linked there as well, along with some buying links. As always, thanks for watching. Have a great day, and let the light in.